I am so excited to welcome our newly minted MVP to the screen. I want to invite Miss Patty to take it away.
Thanks, Tina. The session today is a very one of the many geeky ones, which is silence of the technical lambs when you don't speak up for user experience. You'll see my socials throughout the slide, so feel free to connect, tweet. By all means, super appreciated. And thanks, Tina, for the shout out as well for the MVP status. So, without further ado, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a senior change management consultant at Avanade, so I focus a lot on tech adoption and enterprise change and how to prepare businesses and users to be able to transition during a digital transformation journey. So you might be able to tell, even though I do live in the UK and in London particularly, I don't actually have an English accent because I'm half Greek, half Italian. So that really lends itself well to me loving going into events and speaking. This is why session I thought it was a good shout to give me one of those nice little badges about being a very active speaker. And I'm just super honored and excited to be part of the MVP community as a business applications MVP. So, how did I get here? I have quite a diverse experience in CRM implementations, just under a decade. I work with all sorts of cloud solutions and in house as well. The latest one being Microsoft, but even before that, I worked with Salesforce, Adobe, and AWS. So, throughout it, and I've been an end user for most of it actually. So I've borne the pain of really bad implementations, no change management, not really championing user experience. So I thought it would be really interesting to move into change management and do better. I'm also a self confessed human evangelist. You might wonder what the hell is a human evangelist? We only know about tech ones. So, that is a term I coined in order to explain how I evangelize about the human impact of technology, all of the solutions that we bring to the table. How do we make sure that not only are they empowering the individuals that we are serving them for, but also are doing it in a sustainable long-term future that make a difference. I'm ProSci certified. ProSci is a leading institute in change management worldwide, so they do provide a fantastic certification to help individuals build that knowledge. And outside of the community, I'm also a martial artist and a singer. I keep busy in a way. I have a little phrase here. It's a quote about owning your own perspective and story. And this is what inspired me to get into the community to begin with. I only started May last year officially, even though I was part of the community before that as well, because I had an amazing mentor who I think is on the call today, Elton Grutenboer. He is a fantastic mentor. He's also the Azure Service Bus program manager at Microsoft. And he always believed that I had a really different and fresh story to tell. So that quote really helped solidify that. So, what is today all about? So first up, I will present to you our entrepreneur. We're going to build a digital dollhouse together, and he is pretty marvelous, if I may add. We're then going to talk, we're going to put a solution architect hat on, and we're going to talk about what is our design mission. Think about this digital dollhouse being like a power up, for example. So, how do we build it? What kind of balancing acts do we have to play? And of course, we start with every good intention. We have a delivery plan made of dreams because we want to make something amazing happen. But as we know, reality kicks in sometimes and things can go really south. So we're going to talk about what nightmares we stumble upon that. And then we're going to move into three kinds of lessons and group it into themes. One is the usability and accessibility area. The second one is the security and access management area. And finally, scalability and performance, which, if I may, is one of the fields that is less considered, especially in the initial design. And then it makes it much harder when you have to um, fit it retrospectively. So, without further ado, I think it's time to meet our marvelous entrepreneur. So, for all the Avengers fans out there, I'm sure you recognize this gentleman. He's Tony Stark. What do we know about him? He's a businessman, of course. He is a super wealthy, very active businessman. He's also a designer. He's a designer of all sorts of new technologies, both for his day-to-day financial businesses as well as the Avengers. And he's also a bit of a socialite. He's very much into the celebrity community. He loves partying. He loves socializing with all sorts of people. And what are his requirements for his dream house? So he loves a good view. He wants to have an amazing view of Malibu, but he also wants it to be private. Because he's a designer and he's a researcher, he wants to make sure that he has a lab that is scalable and expansive so he can conduct his experiments and his research. And also, he, as a socialite, he loves luxury, whether it's fast cars or really luxurious properties, but he's also a bit of a minimalist. So if you watched The Avengers, when his house does pop up, it's very luxurious, but it's not overcrowded either. So we need to strike that balance. He's also an Avenger, though. He is Iron Man. And on that note, he has different needs as well that we have to cater for when we solution for his dollhouse. Well, not really dollhouse, his mansion. So in that sense, we know he's an Avenger, which means that because he's a fighter, but also human, he's very attack prone and prone to injury. So with that in mind, what does it mean? He is going to ask for Jarvis to be accessible throughout the whole mansion. So we know Jarvis is his AI assistant that he put together. So we want to make sure that we can integrate from a tech perspective with the whole of the property. We want to have security all over. That's physical as well as digital, and that is as automated as possible. So there's minimal interventions from Tony, and also that it's efficient. He's very eco-conscious. He wants also to make sure that when he's running the massive horsepower that his mansion will need, both as a businessman as an Avenger, it's efficient from all sorts of perspectives. So these are key requirements. Think of it as we went into a requirements gathering session, and now we have our design mission for the Stark Tower. So here's a picture. His mansion is pretty cool, I would say. I'd love to stay there. If we were to create the specs for it and translate that into further, let's say, high-level requirements, if we went to DevOps, for example, and our user stories in a way, we've listened to him, and then we put down that he wants a luxurious, minimalist entertainment area, as we further elaborated. So he wants the privacy, but he also wants to be able to entertain an amount of guests. He wants to automate his security, both physically, so gates and whatnot, access, guests, and whatnot. But he also wants to be protected from attacks, whether it's human or aliens. He also wants to make sure that he has a lab that he can, both in terms of scalability, but also privacy and noise control, can operate in without worrying about the neighbors complaining. And of course, we mentioned Jarvis, so we want to make sure that we automate the whole house to make the most of Jarvis. But also in this era of Gen AI, Copilot products, and all what and whatnot, we are making the most out of it from a natural language perspective. So even in the more complicated cases, Jarvis is still accessible. And finally, we've spoken about running this in an energy efficient way. You see the mansion. It's absolutely massive. So to be able to operate that, we need to find smart ways in order to make it more eco-friendly, but also in a way that, in the era of the energy crisis, in a way, we're still being considerate to be able to sustain this modern design. So we've heard of the requirements. Let's try to group them into a few areas that will then see where the disasters came up. So first of all, we have usability and accessibility. When we build a solution or a house, we have to make sure that our customer or user is able to make the most out of it and actually use it. the right way. So that's the usability element, but also that it's accessible as well. Here's where our content accessibility guidelines come in to help us. And we're going to talk about the principles in a moment, but it's very important that we're making it accessible for all sorts of personas and not just the primary user. So in this case, Tony is a primary user, but as we know, he has loads of guests. He has the Avengers as well, and he has Pepper, his partner. So he's going to have a lot of people using the mansion as well. And as we can see, 4 out of 5 high-level requirements need to be met in this area. So this is definitely going to be a big one. The second one is security and access. So we know that as an Avenger, as well as very wealthy man, he's going to be prone to, at best, burglars. At worst, we're going to have invaders that are either from Hydra, that are alien. You never know. So we're going to make sure that it's as secure as possible from a physical as well as digital perspective, and we're automating the access management process. And on that note, 3 out of 5. So again, we're going to have to pay attention to that area. Thirdly, we have scalability and performance. We have obviously state-of-the-art design. We have a lot of different requirements as part of the high-level user stories, and we need to make sure that the design is energy efficient, that it's scalable. If, let's say, Tony wants to expand to the land next door, or wants to increase its horsepower and thus the performance element. And of course, 3 out of 5 again, so will be one to look out for. Now, the final area, I know it's not a fun topic and we sometimes struggle with it, but it's compliance. So think of it this way. We're building a house. We're going to start with planning permissions. Whatever the state you're in, whatever the country, there's some versions of them. And then you're going to need all sorts of certificates that you're showing that you're compliant, completion certificates, you name it. So you definitely need to abide to certain rules, similar to a digital solution, whether it's a power app or not. In that case, there's definitely a few things. It could be depending on your industry. Let's say you're in financial services and you have the Financial Conduct Authority or the Securities Exchange. It could be an advertising rules and standards. So all sorts, GDPR, of course. So think of it as something that, regardless of how we may feel about it, it's something that we definitely need to look out for. And 4 out of 5 because there's all sorts of rules around these requirements. So now that we've elaborated the requirements, we looked at the user stories a bit further, we've grouped into themes. What's next? Well, let's get some inspiration about how we're going to approach this in practice. So I was watching the keynote for Build. I was really inspired by a couple of things that Satya said. He was going through the history of computing advancements and whatnot, and he called it the pursuit of the dream machine, which I think is a pretty powerful quote. And that what Microsoft is trying to do through harnessing the power of various advancements, including the Gen AI ones, is to bring back the flow as well as the joy of programming. So not only maximizing the efficiency and the speed at which programming happens, but make it fun again, or even more. And on that note, as a company, they also very much look to empower every person, every organization in the planet to achieve more. We know that this doesn't only happen through solutions being delivered, but also through empowering citizen development. There's actually some really cool research from Gartner that show that 4 out of 5 technologists sit outside of traditional IT departments. So if we think about both quotes, that means that if we build things right and collaboratively, we can actually harness a lot more development and collaboration power by bringing all those communities together and creating these fusion teams. So we empower people to own their own solutions and not just adopt them. But ultimately, there's a trifecta here. So, we talked about solutioning. We have a grand design in place. We want to have impact. But at the same time, it's very important that we bring together tech and human evangelists. So tech are the traditional evangelists that look at the products and the different technical solutions. Human evangelists are people like myself that really champion the human impact that we want to have to technology, that are championing user experience, implementation that actually makes a difference and is sustainable, all sorts of things. So having that collaboration would really make a difference, especially if we're talking also about fusion teams. And finally, it's massively important that when we're trying to design, that it's behavior driven. What that means in practice is that we are looking at users. You might have heard of it as user-centered design. We're looking at users and enabling the best practices into the design so that adoption becomes organic, and we're not trying to force something that is really not usable. By the way, feel free to stop me for questions. I really don't mind. We don't have to wait for the end either. Oh, feel free to jump in with a thought.
And if I see anybody in the
Yes,
chat, I
please
will
do
let
let
you
me know if there's a comment or
definitely.
someone raising their hand, because I truly cannot see anything but those slides.
Yeah, no worries.
Fantastic. So we as solution architects, or with a solution architect hat on, we are coming together, the Avengers, we're assembling to make the most amazing solution team coming together. And first of all, what are we going to do? We're going to look at options. We're going to look from a technical perspective at what is the art of the possible. With that in mind, we're going to be realistic and look at costs as well. There's never an infinite budget. And also we are in a pretty interesting economic climate right now. So we're going to have to be realistic and smart. So then we proceed eventually to come up with a design that makes sense. And of course, we want to harness innovation. So something else that is interesting is the 3 A's of innovation. So what is that? Let's see what Scarlet Witch has up for us. So first of all, it's AI. Of course, we are in the era of AI. Of course, it's existed before, but right now it's progressing beyond imagination. So we definitely want to harness that. We want to look at automation. Of course, it's connected, but at the end of the day, it's also something that we have to be conscious about. So we don't just automate things for the sake of, but also analytics. So as we're harnessing all this technology, we want to have that self-servicing monitoring. So we're making the most out of insights, we're making the most out of business resilience as well, and continuity plans, and build something that is super sustainable. And just a bit of a cautionary tale here. I know that we're all excited about AI investments, but some of the things that are very important to remember, this is something Donna Sarkar, for example, mentions quite often as the head of accessibility at Microsoft, is that we shouldn't be anthropomorphizing, well, quite a mindful of the word, AI. What it means essentially, it's don't give it human characteristics, don't give it face, don't give it any kind of power and responsibility, because then we release our own accountability. So as we're building these solutions, we have to remember that we still have the ultimate responsibility and accountability to deliver both sustainable and ethical solutions. So we had the best intentions. We had a dream to make a super awesome mansion for Tony. But fun fact, his mansion was based on a real mansion that is called Razor House. It's in La Jolla, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Please jump in if I'm not, because you never know. It's in California. It's a bit of a fun fact for you. It was built by a really cool architect called Wallace Cunningham. He is pretty futuristic. He builds houses like that quite often with his agency that are really just amazing. And he has been recognized as a top designer globally. Currently, this house, yeah?
It's called La Jolla.
La Jolla. See, I knew I got it wrong. And it's such a shame. Thank you.
It's a cool
Thank you
place.
so much. Sorry?
It's a cool place in San Diego.
It's an amazing place. It's actually currently inhabited by Alicia Keys. So she's having a terrible time. Thoughts and prayers to her there. She's super lucky, obviously, having this amazing house. And I mean, who wouldn't want this clifftop view, right? But a bit of a fun fact for you. Anyway, so we had a dream. We had a dream to deliver something super awesome, but unfortunately, reality kicked in. Let's start with what went wrong in the bedroom. So we built, as you can see from the picture, some massive windows. The bedroom is just at the top. There's massive windows. We kind of forgot that we're Malibu in the case of Tony, and they overlook a very busy tourist beach, which is full of people constantly. And that doesn't make Pepper, so Pepper Potts, Tony's partner slash business assistant, feel comfortable. They're too big. She doesn't feel like she can sleep or even relax by having people constantly looking. If we look at the workshop, what went wrong there? Well, remember how Tony wanted privacy? He wants to conduct some pretty messy, large experiments. Imagine putting together the Iron Man suit and having to fly around and the neighbors listening. That's not fun. We did not really soundproof very well. Very bad quality. We wanted to cut down some costs, and the blasts from when he's testing his suit are scaring the guests as well as the neighbors, which is not very nice, is it? And unfortunately, it's too expensive to retrofit. It's not impossible, but in a realistic world, if you go to a client and do a really bad implementation, there's only usually one of two ways. They're either going to try to score it without paying more, or you're going to have some very upset customers who are either going to go to someone else, or you're going to have some extremely tough margin negative conversations about how you're going to fix things, especially in something that is so expensive. We also got things wrong at the gates. So we mentioned privacy is a very important matter, both digitally and physically. We didn't build efficient gates. Okay, this is a massive property. It needs gates all over. We only considered human attacks. So we considered burglars, Hydra, you name it. We didn't consider superhuman attacks. So the extremist soldiers, in case you remember, part of the Marvel universe, who are enhanced human soldiers, but with a special serum that makes them pretty superhuman. Attacked and were able to get in. And to make it worse, because we didn't set up our security protocols properly, Jarvis wasn't able to react in real time and let Tony know. So that was pretty messy, and Tony was really not happy with us, to be honest. So how did the things go wrong? The first one is we had a bit of an ego as a solution architect. We just thought that we were going to impress Tony by showing him this super cool, massive, futuristic windows. We wanted to cut down some costs on soundproofing. That cheap development did not work out. Think of it if you're building a power up and you're investing either less resources into the project or doing really cheap hacks around the system by not making most use of your licenses, not going to work out. And when it came to the gates not being efficient for superhuman attacks, so two things went wrong there if we think of it from an IT perspective. First of all, our acceptance criteria was not complete. So we didn't consider the superhuman user scenarios. And clearly we had blind spots in testing because we didn't pick it up there either. So just like that, and this is, I know it's cheesy, it's one of my taglines, but I truly believe in it. Once again, this design, as many implementations that I'm sure all of you have seen, were built for senior egos and not for real users. And what are senior egos? It could be the budget holders, it could be the people who are the senior leaders, the biggest voices, you name it. So we built for them, to please them, not the real users. So if we summarize the infinity war that we cause around user experience and how bad things, well, there's 5 areas. So we had this grand design in mind, but we're clearly misguided. And we made some cheap choices that ended up being quite costly later down the line, as we have to fix things, in the digital landscape. That means dedicating more resources, tech debt, running behind on your Scrum deliverables, all sorts. Obviously, the business itself now has to wait it out again. Not really good choices. it was clear that even though we were looking at high-level requirements and user stories, that eventually we opted with going just down the technical path. So we ignore them and we just went on with development. And also, once again, senior egos got in place around leadership, you name it, and we ignored our users. And remember, users is sometimes a very convoluted notion. This is why change management is so important. Part of what we do as an activity is we call it a change impact assessment, where we look at the current and as is state versus the to be state for all the features that we're bringing in. And we start profiling all the different users and impacted communities, creating those personas that are embodying both their pain points, their needs, their roles, and making sure that as we're building, we're championing them throughout. So this kind of activities wouldn't happen otherwise. And another reason why having change management early on is key to success. So once we really champion the users, then we kind of let go of other things that can get in our head, whether it's, let's say, Scrum team, sprint velocity, your burn down rate, and whatnot. So doing things right, essentially, and for the right reasons. So I did promise you we're going to look at 3 key areas. So usability and accessibility is the first one, making sure that what we're building is going to be used in the right way, but also it's accessible. And this is going to be focusing on Tony's lab. I just wanted to call out that accessibility is a very misconstrued notion, and I have to admit that I had to educate myself throughout the community by what that means. It's so easy to consider accessibility as something that is for obvious visual impairments. Let's say you're in a wheelchair or you might be deaf, but it's not. Impairments can be both visual and non-visual. They can be temporary or permanent, and they can include all sorts of things. And let me give you some examples that might not originally register as disabilities. Mental health, it's a massive one. A lot of us at some point in our lives might have suffered from mental health issues, and that on its own can be a disability. And depending on the stage you are, is recognized or not. Other disabilities, I found interesting that the US has recognized long COVID as a disability. That's, I think, a massive leap in recognizing some people's impairments as a result of COVID. Temporary disabilities are also an interesting example. Let's say connectivity. You're in your awesome, holiday resort, but there's no Wi-Fi. That's a connectivity issue. We also need to be inclusive in our designs for that, and so forth. So these are just some examples to remind you that accessibility is not something that we should consider at the end. We should always champion because it impacts more people, including ourselves. So the first one is our beloved Huck. He's trying to get around the lab, but we know he's pretty big. And he can't fit around because the way we build the lab, it has a lot of narrow spaces. We spend more money on islands and massive worktops rather than having space to move around because we just thought of Tony, little slim man compared to Huck, and he can't move around. So if we think about our accessibility guidelines, this is around the operable principle. He can't operate the lab on his own, even though we know he's one of the most amazing scientists and researchers alongside Tony. So how's he going to help? The second one is, again, part of our failures in our requirements and our acceptance criteria. We didn't consider that when Tony gets into Ironman mode and he uses his holographic screen, some of the things are not readable for him. So that means that we breached another principle, which is around being perceivable. And clearly, when we were looking at our acceptance criteria and our design, we didn't think of a conditional design. So we just thought of Tony, but not of the needs of Iron Man when he transforms in it. And that's where the conditional element comes in. Same user, in theory, but different needs. And also Thor has some problems here. So we know Thor, if you watch the first Thor movie, you'll notice that even though he's extremely powerful, he's not used to the ways of the earth. That includes him not being very savvy from a digital perspective. So when he's trying to code things, the dev interface makes no sense. So how we could fix it? We can use natural language. The Power Apps Copilot is a fantastic example of that, which gives Thor and any other citizen developer Avenger the opportunity to be part of the development process without having all this immense knowledge to begin with, and can build it as he goes. There are some things to consider, similar to the considerations earlier for AI, that I have been asking myself. So please shout if you have some answers. We keep talking about the co-pilot, but I don't think there's enough chat about who is the pilot to begin with and where are they going? And also, do they have the right enablers for support? So the co-pilot products, for example, are a fantastic evolution in the Microsoft stack, but they also pose their own challenges. For example, if you go into the Power Apps Copilot, yes, it gets you started. It has a base for an app. But if you don't really know certain things, then you don't know how to proceed after that. You can still converse with the bot, but at the end of the day, you still need some foundations. So you need, I know we all speak about a center of excellence and the starter kits, but it's also important to have a center of enablement. So giving the support to these users, such as stores or citizen developers, so that they have the right guard list, but also the right knowledge and SME support to surround them in their journey so that they know where they're going. The second one is security and access management. So for this one, we're going to look at the tower as a whole. This is something pertinent to anything we build. It could be a Power App, it could be any other business application, really. It's very important that we make it secure, both for the sake of our business, the users, but also regulation. And we make the access management side of things as robust, efficient, and automated as possible, because we don't really want to waste too much time on manual work, right? So here when Loki comes in. Let's be honest, Loki has a bit of a rough relationship with the Avengers. He's good one day, the other one he's bad, roaming around trying to steal the Tesseract from Tony. So Tony that is, doesn't really trust him. So he doesn't really want to give him access to all of the files in the system. So this is where we have an opportunity to implement role-based access. So by combining the power of the Active Directory, yes, I know there's a lovely name now, Entra or whatnot for it, but either way, let's go with it. By implementing that, single sign-on and multi-factor authentication will make sure that each Avenger has their own role set up, that they're only having the right crew credentials. So let's say if they need to only read record, let's say in Dynamics, if we're implementing a Dynamics app or a model-driven app, whatever that may be, that they're reading only the record that they should. If they're able to edit, great. But either way, we're implementing, from a security and access perspective, the right principles. And so Loki cannot access the confidential records. We know Hydra is a bit of a problem as well. They're always trying to infiltrate. So think of them as a prime example for social engineering. They're always trying to impersonate the Avengers or trusted advisors. And in this case, they're trying to infiltrate the tower, both physically, but also digitally. So this is where physical security becomes important to begin with. It just so happens that we can use the Azure IoT Hub for those geeks out there that are using some version of an IoT Hub. I found this very interesting researching about that and how you can bring all your devices together through the hub, but also implement the security layer through Sphere. Totally appreciate it. Super costly. And I personally don't know someone who's implemented, but I loved reading about it because I love automation. And either way, it was quite an interesting concept because ultimately, Tony has a lot of different security devices and workflows in the house, but he wants to make sure that those are impenetrable. So Sphere or any other security solution will come to overlay it to make sure that the devices are securely talking to each other. Everything that is stored is not on-prem, obviously, and in the cloud safely. and so forth. And finally, when it comes to bringing the Avengers teams together, we know that we have some key Avengers that we see in every movie, but new ones are recruited every day, or maybe they go under the radar, so they come and go. And ultimately, that creates a lot of manual hassle for what we know as a JML process, so joiners, movers, leavers process. It's the kind of hassle that every company has when they have people either joining, moving around, or leaving altogether. So we want to make the most out of automation. So Power Automate is a fantastic opportunity to do so. I've witnessed so many companies burn out their production support or IT support team through this manual interventions. And it's really such a shame, because you should be able to automate most of the access part of things. And finally, we're going to look at scalability and performance. And this is because, let's be honest, Tony's a billionaire. He can afford a lot of things. He wants a mansion today. He wants a mansion next day, the next day, to make it into a bigger one. So we need to be able to afford both from a physical and a digital perspective that scalability, which has an impact on performance as well. And in practice, if we don't consider it early on in our design, retrofitting these things not only are expensive, but can also be very complicated. And we also have to consider that when we do implement, again, where change management comes in from a personas perspective, let's take a business that is operating in the digital marketplace / retail space. They might be coming to us because they have 10 customers a day now, so they want a simple retail app. But who says that they're not going to grow to 1,000 or 1,000,000 users in weeks, years, and whatnot? So we need to be able to create something for them that can still perform under that load. Again, why designing with that mentality and making sure that we're considering certain things around the experience and performance is very crucial when we as a product development team and a Fusion product development team can make that happen. Either way, what went wrong here? So we're talking about Jarvis as a general AI assistant for Tony. One bit, a bit worry here is that there's constant threats that both the Avengers as well as S.H.I.E.L.D. are facing, and they need to talk to each other. So when it comes to managing real-time alerts and that communication between the different systems and organizations for global threats, it became a little bit hard for Jarvis to manage. So this is where automated monitoring can really make a difference. So for example, we can use Azure Logic Apps to implement those workflows and make it as real-time and accessible as possible for Jarvis to settle those communications. So Tony doesn't have to be on constant calls with Nick Fury. Moving on, something that will probably be a funny one is that Tony is worried that we implemented too many on-prem solutions and we brought too many physical servers. We did say he's a minimalist, right? So he's not very happy with the fact he's inundated with servers, physically speaking. So we should have thought about scale here, because going serverless and using virtual machines can help on all sorts of occasions, not just saving space and making it more secure. So another great opportunity. They're super easy to set up as well. So it's a shame that we did not consider it or at the scale that he needed. And finally, again, because we built this massive mansion, we've realized that his engineering team that has to maintain the solar panels that we installed for energy efficiency are really hard to project manage. So there's a massive engineering team. They're trying to sort out maintenance around the mansion. The solar panels are quite a pain. And they have to do it manually. That's not going to work, right? We know exactly the product for them. We got D365 field service for them. It includes a very smooth project management set of features, and they can track the process of the maintenance and fixes end to end. So again, we did not consider the full stack. So it's pretty clear that when we're building an app, Power App, or a digital solution of any sort, or even a house in this case, we can use the full power of the Microsoft stack to drive efficiency both at a product level, but as well as a collaboration level. We can automate as many processes as possible and ultimately enhance the user experience. Truly, sky's the limit, and how we unleash that power is by working together on this user-centered design approach, because then we're championing the users throughout the development lifecycle. We're refining the requirements in a way that user stories stand out. We set up our appropriate acceptance criteria. Our conditional design is taken care of. And we are also very conscious when we implement our testing, so we don't end up with blind spots that create that tech debt. And ultimately, very unhappy customers. So you might wonder, how did this project did not get supported by change management if it's all such a good principle? Well, unfortunately, this is something that happens very frequently in the industry. Change management is seen as a luxury. It's a nice to have. The minute there's budget constraints, it gets cut off very quickly. If it does get involved, it's what we call by a lot of people comms and training. That's not what we do. It's part of it, but that's not our cause. And ultimately, it's not done the right way. So the ProSci Institute came up with the theory of how it works with a really cool term. So in a good world, change management takes us from the current state, which has some digital challenges, to a transitional state where we're building our solution and then ultimately a successful future state. But without change management, what is observed is that we have the same starting point. We're not building the right foundations, so it's very wobbly. And then we don't get the success that we wanted. And they call it Swiss cheese future state. So what happens if we don't get those right results and we don't get success in a future state is that we don't get a return on investment. And also, we go through a vicious cycle of failed changes. Our tech debt will get us into more sprints, more fixes, but we're not implementing change management and championing our users. So you still go through a vicious cycle of failures, and not just digital ones, as in technical ones, but also low or bad adoption. There's confusion around governance. Let's say, in this case, you're trying to enable some of the vendors as citizen developers, but you're not set up any governance around it. They're going to struggle, and it's going to cause some major risks for the solution as well from a security and implementation perspective. And ultimately, that's going to make our customers unhappy. In this case, the Avengers are pretty unhappy with Tony. Research has shown from the ProSci Institute that when you're involved with a very strong change management team and program, you can actually maximize your success, as in deliver in time and in budget, by up to 6 times. That's a pretty big number, right? They've done some research around different industries and different kind of companies, and this is what they found. So that's pretty powerful, because ultimately it shows that it becomes a team success, and who doesn't want that? Change is a team sport. We can't ignore that. It takes a village. So it's not just digital transformation is just not one team's effort. And it's actually a coalition and a collaboration between 3 key teams. So we got leadership, so our sponsors for the project, we got the project management team that develops the product, and also the change management team. We look at what they are aligned to. So leadership is obviously providing not just the budget, but also direction. It makes those big governance decisions. Our project management team is looking after, let's say, Scrum teams or technical teams in general that are going from scoping to design and implementation. And change managers have a sole mission, the people side of change. They're looking at how they can enable individuals to get that collective success at a business level by defining what matters to them. And this is why in the user-centered design world, it's important to bring everyone together in this tripod, because, for example, how is the project going to have time and access to the users to understand their pain points when they're too busy discussing with business stakeholders that probably don't have access to the systems about what their requirements are? It's not going to work. And this is why success is key through these collaborations. So we give the vision for change. Why are we changing? We are showcasing benefits. We are defining smart metrics, and we're building something that is going to be desired and adopted organically. So ultimately, I want to leave you with the same tagline. Really do build for your users, listen to them, profile them, work with your change management team, work with your change champions. So you're building for something that actually will make a difference and will have an impact and not just pleasing someone's ego or multiple people's egos. I believe that asking questions is the first step. We need to challenge the status quo. This is how we bring about change and we bring about real impact. Whether you have to challenge your, let's say, solution architect in a design, whether you have to challenge your Scrum Master in the way the Scrum team is operated, your developer in certain aspects, or even your client themselves, that's perfectly okay. This is how you're going to bring about change. We can't be silent. That's the whole point of the session. Silence from a technical perspective leads to really bad implementations. And it's really important that we underpin it with governance around the project that is enabling. Because if we think about the whole ecosystem of development and all the roles, if we make it as that being owned by the whole team, everyone is accountable for what is delivered, then change becomes desirable. We all have a part to play. We are democratizing and empowering voices and perspectives so everyone feels heard. And what's going to happen? You're going to have some pretty happy allies that would want to join you on this transformation journey. At this point, I want to take some questions if there are any, or I would love to hear your thoughts on something that you have related with. I'm sure we've all faced bad implementations, and it's actually the end of the session. So any thoughts, questions, anything you want to share? And I'll take a sip of water as you do.
I want to give the floor to those to ask questions first. I see Lucas has his hand up.
Go
Yeah,
for it,
yeah.
Lucas.
Yeah, this is fantastic. So thank you so much. We actually just started dealing with a customer who which spent about, I don't know, I think $3 to $4 million on a homegrown field service mobile application. The whole organization, 10,000 tags, and then they got to roll it out. And then they discovered that everybody in the field was using a Samsung 8. You remember the old school phones?
Yes.
And there's no way to move away from them unless buying 10,000 phones. So the project completely flopped. They did not listen to their users, to their key users, didn't take them in mind. And this is just a really good example. So thank you. This is super important when it comes to enterprise projects. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the point. So everyone has their own role. We can't expect, for example, the developers to go around asking users. So leave it to the people that do interact. We have access to change champions, but also we speak to users overall. And as you said, a very simple thing got missed that ultimately flopped the whole project. You lost quite a few million in the way. And I'm sure the customer was extremely disappointed, right? So it's a shame.
It's rough. That
Yeah,
is rough.
absolutely. You could almost hear the millions of dollars flush down the toilet if you listened really
that is
closely.
so bad. Oh, that's terrible.
Do not
thanks
let
for
that
sharing,
be
Lucas.
anybody on this call. You've seen this, you listened to this whole presentation, you have no excuse to let that
No
happen.
excuse. Always,
Yeah.
always have that collaboration.
Yes. I see Brent asked, any specific recommendations for Power Apps and Power Automate projects?
From a change management perspective or general implementation tips? Or should I just cover both?
Brent, are you there? He might be on mute. Oh, he says both.
Okay, that's fine. So from a change management perspective, the base methodology should be the same. So Don had down on a change management program, even if it is one person is still way more impactful than none. Start from pre-sales. Please start from pre-sales, no matter what the project is, whether it's Power Platform or Dynamics or another solution. The reason I'm saying that is because if we don't get involved from a pre-sales perspective, what happens is you're scoping out and promising to the client non-realistic code plans to go into production. You're not considering what the steps are from an adoption perspective. The deliverables are all over. So start with pre-sales. That's my first tip. Make sure you have a change manager, at least if not a change management team. Make sure that you're looking at that user-centered design approach. So in a simple example, and this is something that I've done and it definitely worked in practice. And by in practice, I mean, in my previous company, I was one of the change managers that rolled out Dynamics globally for HSBC, one of the biggest banks in the world, and we worked in that hybrid model. So essentially, change management was part of the Scrum development team, and we were looking at the design together. Some practical examples, let's say, in the field of Power Apps and Power Automate. So we were going into the solutioning calls together, or the refinement calls. They were doing a playback of what they think the design should look like, whether it's VZ or later down the line with a demo. And we were playing back the user experience and the user journey. So I was coming with a view of what the pain points were and what the current user journey is. And we were comparing what the benefits and the user experience should be based on the design. This saves an insane amount of time from development. Your developers are happier as well because they have a clear direction. And also something that is super, super important in Power Apps is your front-end UI and messaging. So from a UI perspective, you can make it intuitive and pretty. That's great. Please make it accessible. Please make sure that you're sorting out those guidelines, and also make sure that your front-end messaging is clear. So what I mean is, in all your fields or your forms, whatever the user experience is that you're putting together, make sure it's simple language. We can't be expecting people to know jargon. If you absolutely have to use jargon, whether it's abbreviations or some weird term, do some hover over explanations. Some tooltips, recommendations, whatever you can do to make it super easy to understand, because otherwise you have some pretty bad practices. So let's say you're collecting data, you're going to have really bad and incomplete data. You don't want that, or people complaining to your production support and so forth. And finally, I would say also use your change managers in a way for early feedback from a user perspective, even at the demo level. And also when you do your testing, have the right personas test as well. Of course, technical testing with the QA team is important, but business testing is equally important. Have the right profiles of people and users, so they're giving their business sign-off. So your consumable product is actually consumable and not just chaos in production.
Thank you for making this, taking this content and making it very real for us.
Oh, I'm super, super thankful as well for having me. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and evening, really. The socials are still here, LinkedIn, Twitter, feel free. I'm always out for a chat. I'm really passionate about all of these things, and I'm super grateful for all these interactions as well, because there's always something to learn, and we can always learn from each other, right?